Welcome to the Real Mom Hub, where we celebrate the beautiful, profound transformation into motherhood.
It's a journey that shatters and rebuilds us in incredible ways. We share the voices of everyday moms in the trenches, honing and discovering their natural instincts and superpowers.
We air out the hard parts of parenting people don't like to talk about. Because matrescence leaves no one unscathed, and let's be honest, it's as hard as it is joyful.
So why not embrace it? Lean into the growth, the struggle, the magic. This is your opportunity for complete and utter personal transformation.
We're so glad you're here.
We're tuning in here really quickly before we get started with this next guest. This was a really powerful conversation for us to be a part of, and we're so grateful that Elise decided to share herself and her story. We wanted to hop on really quickly. First of all, to say we're absolutely dirty liars. It's over an hour. So
only by 10 minutes though.
Yes, Callie, the editing queen, just kept to the crucial parts for you. I think once you get going, you'll understand why we presumed to take up more of your time in this episode. Again, just a huge thank you to Elise. We both felt pretty shaken just at her experience and the kinds of mountains that powerful women can climb over, especially when they're doing so for their kids, their families, and really just astounded by the power of motherhood. So we walked away super inspired and are excited for you to have the same experience. We should also note, Elise does talk about having a delivery of a baby with Down syndrome. And that sweet babe also had some major health complications, which they're still walking through today. So just wanted to say, if you know a woman or a mother in your life that you think this story would resonate with, please go ahead and share it with them.
Elise has so much wisdom to share, and I think she's so inspirational regardless of your mother journey, but especially if you know someone that's going through a similar situation.
Absolutely. So hit that share button and feel free to text us with any feedback that you have, as always. And you can follow us on social at The Real Mom Hub. Thanks for listening.
Well, anyways, this is Elise.
Good to meet you, Elise.
Hi. You too, Emily.
Thanks
Does
for being
everything
here.
Can you guys hear me and everything?
It's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, thanks for being here. I'm so
No
excited.
problem. I'm excited too. It's been interesting because I haven't listened to all the previous podcasts, but even just listening to the ones I have, brings back so many memories of early motherhood. I can just go back there like it happened yesterday.
And I don't want to spoil your whole story, but I'm so fascinated to hear about that because you're sort of a unique situation with your stages of motherhood.
Right.
So can you just fill us in, your lifestyle, just how many kids you have, just a quick little background?
Okay, so I have 4 kids. One is 23 and married. His wife is about to have a baby any day now. They've asked me to be at the birth, so I'm like,
wow.
Long ago, I did doula training and was a doula for a while. So they were like, do you just want to be our doula?
Wow.
So that's a big thing. It's at night, I'm not sleeping that much because I'm just like, okay, this is going to happen. So that's number 1, Jude. And then Esme is 20 and she's still at home. She'll head off to college next year. And then I've got Jane, who's 6, and Remy, who's 4. I've been married for 25 years, and I got married when I was 19.
Whoa!
Yeah, and had a baby 10 months later. And that was someone who said, I will never get married and I'll never have kids.
Isaiah?
No, that was me. I was never going to get married.
At all? You were not married? You're like, marriage is not for me?
No, I didn't. I never did that my wedding's going to be like this, that I'm going to have this many kids. And I wanted to I wasn't even Catholic, but I wanted to go to India and work with Mother Teresa.
So how did we get to that, from that to you're 19 and married? Because it's not that long ago. I mean, that's very young to be married.
Yeah, it was really young, and I looked even younger. So it was really, I mean, to walk around pregnant was actually embarrassing. Just the looks that I got and the way I was treated. But so one of my best friends, I met him when I was 14. We had been friends for a long time. And I was always like, the first time I met him, I told my sister, I was like, I would marry him if I was going to get married. But he was older, you know, a couple of years older. He was going to college. And when I graduated from high school, he was like, I'm in love with you. So we were like, well, we'll get married someday. But I'm headed off to college and he was headed off to Israel to study for 3 months. And my parents were like, there's no way you're getting married till you're done with college. And all my friends said they would disown me if I got married. We were the smart girls, you know, like we had PhD plans and, you know, all of that. So then just because after like a year of a long distance relationship, we were just like, you know, our whole relationship was writing letters and we were just like, we're just going to get married. And we did it. So, and the thought was, I've done a year of college, but I'm not interested in what I'm studying. Whereas like he had 3 years of college and wasn't interested in what he was studying. So I was like, I'll work while you finish and then you work while I go back to school.
Wow.
That was kind of the plan. I mean, we had like a giant box of letters we had written to each other.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like at this point that's like grandparent level. Like it's so rare that you were in a situation where that was the mode of
really
courtship.
rare. And even our kids have said it's just really hard for them, like thinking about relationships and finding someone because they're like, your story is so uncommon. You know, it's so weird. Like, you're so in love. You know, what if we can't find someone like that or, you know, whatever. Now, they were young during our hardest times, because I would say right around like 7 years was a really, really hard time just because plans change. You know, I thought I'll have a kid and then even then I'll still go back to school, and just finding out what kind of a mother I was kind of a surprise to me. So I don't want people watching my kids, and I don't want to not be breastfeeding or, you know, just things like that. I didn't know how strong those things would be. So it was just a lot of quick changes.
When you think about that time, was there something specific or like a handful of things that jump out at you as just totally shaking you to your core?
There were 2 things that shook me to my core, and that was, the first one was getting pregnant, actually.
So that wasn't planned.
To my core. That was not planned at all. That was so far from my plan. And even so, like, I think there was a part of me that really wanted it, but I knew there would be no like family support or excitement. So that was, you know, it was just like something I had to kind of like keep quietly in for a while and figure out like, how are we going to tell people? And, you know, like I think my mom started crying. And not for joy, not for...
And were you near family at this time? Like, was support from them possible outside of the hardship?
We were in Holland, Michigan, which is about 3 hours from Chicago, where the rest of my family was. And then my husband's family was about an hour away. I remember like my mom came up a month before my son was born, and like we did some shopping, and, you know, just like I had no idea what I was doing. She's like, you'll need this and you'll need that. But it was definitely like, and your life is over.
Wow.
So yeah.
This is so like, what a wild time. Because if I'm thinking about matrescence and how that process of just becoming a mother for most women can change your values or your expectations of how you thought your life would live or what kind of a mom you'd be, your relationships with your spouse, with your friends. You kind of checked all of those boxes in terms of huge change just by getting married when you did.
Right.
Like you already had embarked on a lot of difficult transition. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And then on top of that, it turns out like I'm one of those people that get hyperemesis when I'm pregnant.
I don't know what is that?
So it's
Callie's
not,
face is
like when you
distraught.
are nauseous, like to a medical level.
You throw up like 20 times a day.
Oh,
and
no.
Can't do anything.
For all your pregnancies or that first one?
So for the first two, it ended around like 4 months. And then,
long.
I mean, some people it's the whole time.
Well, for my third one, it was the whole time.
Oh.
And so that was like a new level. Yeah. Like I just remember like, cause I would get a really horrible migraine. I'd be in the bathroom like throwing up and have this migraine. And I just remember like laying on the floor and my husband just like coming in and like picking me up, getting me back to my bed. So yeah, motherhood is so many layers for me, but thankfully the pregnancy part is 9 months. So
and that's it. Still a long time when you're in it.
So long. Yes.
Yeah.
So you had Jude, you had that horrible pregnancy, and it was like accidental. Then was it a choice to have Esme, or was that also a surprise?
So I knew after we had one that I didn't want like just one child, if that makes sense. So I grew up with 3 siblings and my sister was my best friend. I just, it was like, well, if we're doing this, but I also knew already, like I get really sick and I want to go back to college and I don't want to homeschool. So actually when Jude was 2, I got pregnant really sick and I did 4 months of morning sickness and then I lost that baby. Oh. So then after that, I realized, because, I went from a place like I'm 19 and I'm pregnant and I didn't even have to try to get pregnant. And then I'm pregnant again. This is just what happened, like this is just my life. And then losing that one, I realized like, no, life is a gift and nothing is a guarantee. And then, they were like, you need to get your health back and that kind of thing. But once I was healthy and strong, 6 months later, then I told my husband, I was like, I really just want to have a girl. So.
And you did.
I did. Then there was the decision, I think even for him, like it just really shook him to see how sick I would get. I love running and I love hiking and I will chop wood and we'd go camping, so it's like, for him to see me completely debilitated, it was like, I think we're done. So it took me a really long time, but as the older kids got older and as my faith grew and my understanding of life and how precious it is and what a gift motherhood is and coming to a place where I was surrounded by people who valued motherhood, and a husband who like loves kids so much. It was like I had the support I needed to say, let's try again. So we did.
That's a journey. I don't even know if we've gotten to the part where you said it was just really hard at year 7. But I'm curious, you mentioned it sounds like there was not a lot of support familially or from friends even at the time when you were telling people you were pregnant. I'm wondering if that ever shifted or, where you found support.
So that's actually something I wrote down because it's a really important part of me becoming who I was. We moved from the Midwest out to Canada and then to Washington State. And when I was in Canada, I surrounded myself with like midwives and doulas and learned how to be a doula. That was incredible. And then, so my kids would have been, I think Esme would have been 1.5 and Jude would have been 5. And my husband was finishing his master's degree because I had decided I don't want to go back to school yet. To build his career and stuff, we thought it would be better, like you go a little further. So we were living in Bellingham, Washington. And
so fun.
Yeah. So when we were there, initially it was really hard because we were living on Western's college campus. So that was weird because we're on this huge college campus, like an apartment right off of it. There are no kids. Nobody in those apartments has kids. And my husband's actually driving up to Canada for school and I'm working, he's working. But we're never having anyone else watch the kids. Like we're just tag teaming. Oh. So this was year 7. This was the hard year. And we had one car. And So I would get on the bus and go downtown Bellingham, take the kids to the library and do all this stuff. Well, Esme was still breastfeeding, and she was a pretty aggressive breastfeeder.
What does that even mean? Tell me more.
You know, when she wanted it, and there was no putting her off. And so I'd be on a bus just like crammed with college girls and guys. I'd be sitting there breastfeeding, and the dirty looks. Because when I was thinking, like, when was a time that, like, society did not support me? I'm like, I would think of that time.
Wow.
Like, just how, and I was thinking, like, you know, everyone here is going to be crunchy granola.
Yes, I think that also. Especially Bellingham, like Western.
Right. But I think it was just the college students. And then, so I had sent Jude to public school kindergarten, and that was a total fail. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to homeschool. And
Even though you said you never would.
Though I never would.
Were you homeschooled?
Yes, part of the time. Like I had done everything, like homeschool, public school, private school, boarding school,
boarding school.
And I was like, homeschool is out.
Because your parents were missionaries, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
So I was like, well, if I'm going to homeschool, we need to do social stuff, because that's the thing for me. Like, if you're going to homeschool, that means you're just learning some stuff at home, but you're out doing stuff a lot. And at the time, I was very, like, not living any kind of faith or anything. And I really did not want to be stuck in, like, a religion-based homeschool bubble. I just found a random group of women. I actually met them on the library lawn. A lady was like breastfeeding her child, and
my person.
Yeah.
We started talking, and like her son, who was older than my son, started playing chess with him, or something like that. She just gave me her phone number, and she's like, we have a Wednesday park day. And those were my people for the next 10 years.
Wow. Wow.
And what was amazing is all the women in that group they were 10 to 15 years older than me. So they had careers, they had travel, they had it all. And all of them said, we wish we would have started motherhood younger.
Really?
Wow.
So that really, to me, like, they valued my choices so much. And they valued what I was doing and what I had to bring to the group. They just liked everything about me and what I was doing and how I was raising my kids. And so I felt, it's like by the time we moved back to the Midwest 10 years later, I felt really great about the choices that I had made. So that's the happy part of the story, is like we did find our place.
Did you have any mom friends your age, or were they all?
They were all older, because the friends that I had in high school or my year of college, like none of them, they're having kids now, but they did, they were intellectuals, they got their PhDs, they got just a very different path.
Were you able to keep in touch with any of them or most of them? What did that look like for you?
There were a lot of people that I fell out of touch with during that time we were in Bellingham. Kind of like, I got married, and a lot of my friends didn't understand that choice, and my family didn't understand it completely. So I think that's why we had to get some distance and kind of figure out who we were. And then I found a lot of people, as time went by, would reach out. I have a friend, a Danish friend, who I had gotten to know in Africa when I was growing up. And even just a few years ago, she got in touch and we FaceTimed and everything. So I feel like now any of those people I'd have an amazing time with, or have connected with. It just took that time of figuring out. I don't know if it was the era too for women. My parents were both feminists, and like it was always very clear, like what was great about me was my brain. It was not my uterus. Just, like, that is what's awesome about you, okay?
Which, what a gift for some women, or, how many women maybe would benefit from that kind of perspective who don't get it in today's world. And, however, there's a flip side.
Yes, and I love the way I was raised. Like, I love it that my dad was having me memorize Shakespeare at age 5. I love it all, but I feel like now maybe I'm wrong or have a rosy view of things or something, but I feel like I see young people making all different kinds of choices. And it's not so much like this is the one choice that you're supposed to make. It just seems like there's a little bit more openness for saying, oh yeah, maybe you should take a gap year, or maybe you should go travel, or maybe you want to learn a trade. You know, like I just don't feel like there were discussions like that happening 25 years ago.
But I mean, I'm thinking about myself in high school. Like, if one of my friends who I was sure was going to go, you know, get their master's and get like, I think at this point I'm the least educated of my high school friends.
Okay.
With a 4-year degree. I think I would have been judgmental. Like if they suddenly got married and had kids, I would have freaked out.
I would have judged myself. I mean, I always think like if that was my kids, I would have really struggled.
I was wondering that. Okay, but not now.
Right, and I'm curious, like there must have been some sort of presence of self that was strong enough to help you take the path of most resistance. I don't know.
I think because I was thinking about this, you know, just thinking about like, why did I make the choices I made? Why did I have the strength to go against, you know, what everybody thought I should do? First of all, I think because I had never really had a home, like we were always moving around. I think when I found somebody who was home to me and then went on to have children who became home, and wherever we lived, they were with me. You know, like, I think for me, it was like, I've never had a home. I've never felt at home anywhere. And now when I'm with these people, I have a home. So that, I mean, that's one thing I think about, because my husband represented, you know, kind of the first person that I felt like I'm comfortable with all the time. I think I didn't have a clear enough life plan to do anything else. There was nothing better. Like, I had gone to study linguistics for a year downtown Chicago, and it was like, I don't like living in the big city right now. I'm not that interested in my classes. You know? So I was like, I'll try something new.
Wow. I love that. I'll try something new and get married.
Yeah.
It was very new.
So when you're talking about having your husband as your home, which is so beautiful, and your kids, how during that time were you unable to like stay connected to yourself or figure out what defined your personhood and your identities?
I think that was the struggle that I went through, kind of like those 10 years when we were away. And it was pretty significant. And there were times where, you know, even like maybe at the hardest times, like that year 7 when we weren't really seeing each other much because of how busy we were. And one of my kids was just at a really intense age. You know, I would have thoughts of like, maybe I should just find a different life, you know, that kind of thing. But I think for me, so I was an avid reader. Like I would read when I was breastfeeding. I would read when I was cooking. Like I just always had a book. And then audiobooks. And then the other thing I would say would be walking, running, and hiking. Like for me, so at one point we rented a little house. It's like at the base of Chuckanut Mountain. Oh. I don't know if you... Yeah, so here's our little house, kind of like in the middle of nowhere. And then there's this steep, like huge hiking path, like one of the steepest hiking paths in the area. And my husband would get home from work, and if it was a hard day, I'd just be like, hey, bye. And I would just hike up there, you know, as fast as I could, as far as I could, and just think like, who am I? What am I? You know, where am I going? What's my plan? And then one thing that also unfolded during that time was I started working for a company from home. I know for my parents, it was a really big deal for them because they knew my boss, and he said to them, he's like, yeah, this, you know, lady studying, you know, getting her PhD in linguistics, like we tried her and she didn't really wasn't able to do the training, but Elise was doing fine. So I started doing that. It was actually the Chaldean Bible translation. So I didn't have to learn Chaldean, but I had to learn how to use their method or whatever for editing. And I think for my parents, they were like, okay, she has a real job. And then for myself, I was making good money. So that my husband was like, do whatever you want with it. I don't care. It was like, that's your thing. And so I think that was a real shift, like having a job that my family thought was prestigious, that I could do from home. Even now, like I struggle with the fact that for the past 7 years, I haven't made an income. Like I always loved having money that I could kind of choose what to do with it, or like buy a present for someone in the family that was really from me. Like I really struggled, like around Christmas, I'm like, I want my own money to buy Isaiah something. So yeah, that was a big piece of it too. Just like having something that I could succeed at, still mother in a way that I felt good about. That's what I discovered about myself, is just that I'm 100% hands-on. I think in one of the other podcasts, you guys were talking about like fierce mothering, and that, that's like where all my fierceness comes out. So.
Did you feel that right away when Jude, or did it develop?
It was right away. It was absolutely right away.
When you were doing the Bible translation, had you, like you mentioned that you were very anti-religion, had you discovered a faith that you were into at that point, or was it just a job that was interesting?
It was just a job that was interesting. And in fact, I'd always have to read like the English, so I have like, it's like you have the 4 squares on the screen, and you have the Chaldean, and then you have, I think, the Arabic and this, and then the English. And so I'd be reading through the English, and I'd be like, oh, this stuff makes me so mad. Because I grew up hearing it all. And I just, at the time, like, I really just, like, turned my stomach. Some of it, I was just like, I don't get it. But, that was just where I was at the time.
Wow. And this was after the doula work? The doula work came before?
Yep. So
that was another thing that you seemingly really, at a young age, because you were so young when you would have been in Canada, latched onto this learning, this teaching, this community.
Yes. And that was amazing. And I had done several births. And then one of the births I was at, I actually had to leave. I didn't know I was pregnant with Esme yet. And I had to leave because I got really sick. And so when I got pregnant with her, I was like, okay, probably. And in fact, my midwife said, you can't do all night births or you could lose another baby. So, again, that changed. But at the same time, like, I had a lot of confidence from the births that I had attended. And then, so my first was born in the hospital, but Esme was born at home. And a friend of mine and we were actually back in Chicago when Esme was born. And a friend that I did doula training with was in New York. And I called her when I went into labor with Esme. She got into a plane and she caught Esme when she was born.
Oh my God.
That's so wild.
Yeah. Wow.
That's so cool.
So, and I had she's just like, just in case, just call me, when you go into labor. So yeah, that was so cool. And my first labor had been like 2.5 hours. And then with Esme, it was a lot more gentle and slow. So
I'm sorry. I just heard what
I'm
you
processing
said.
that still too.
2.5 hours for your first birth?
Yes.
Was it a well birth? Were you okay? Okay.
I mean, it was safe, it was fine, but I was actually 2 weeks overdue and scheduled to be induced that morning. And my water broke, 2.5 hours from that moment. So when the contractions started, like, there was nothing in between contractions. It was just right there. And then he came, and I remember, so I tend to handle pain like by getting really quiet. And I remember after my son was born, my husband was like, well, that wasn't so bad. And I just looked at him and I was like,
you flipped in the bird and moved.
I was like, if getting stabbed repeatedly with a knife and run over by a truck isn't bad,
Everyone listening to this is just cringing right now.
Now you know what not to say.
Women, men.
So the good part is that when I was becoming a doula, I was reading all these books, like, I don't know if you guys have read like Spiritual Midwifery or Ina May
It's
Gaskin.
on my list.
My husband would just like sit there reading it. He'd be like, this is so cool. Like he got so into the doula stuff. And then my labor with Esme was 12 hours and it was like really gentle. But I had read so much and I had visualized so much. So I would visualize, what that birth was going to be like. And it really was. It was what in my head I kept because I kept hearing like, just picture things going really well, things being really peaceful. And it was. And that's not to say it wasn't hard or painful or, you're still going to reach transition and throw up and say, I can't do this anymore. But I could be present. I could realize, okay, this is what's happening and I'm a part of it and I'm going to. So, yeah.
So this is the big question that I think Emily and I both have for you after hearing your story. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like matrescence happened for you like the one time? Or was there like the second matrescence years and years and years later when you had your next two kids?
Well, I was what really stuck on, you have a 4-year-old right now. Yeah. I'm like, okay.
And you're about to be a
grandma.
grandma.
A few years, or like 10 years between kids, do we do matrescence all over again?
Right. Well, that's what I was thinking about a lot. So I would say that I did have 2 matrescence. So first I'd say my first one it took me about 5 years to adjust to motherhood. So it was like a long one. And then what's interesting is the second time it was a second matrescence because the first one, the term that everybody hates and probably does, you guys were saying bounce back. I did with the first 2.
So are you speaking physically? Are you speaking like in which capacity?
Probably down the line. Maybe mentally, physically, emotionally. I realized I didn't bounce back as fast as I thought I had. But in terms of like wearing my normal jeans a week later, not having varicose veins.
A week later?
Yes. Not having anything, no stretch marks, no varicose veins. And then not only that, but like after Esme was born, I was like, cooking dinner for everybody 3 days later.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So not like, so I always thought like, well, I pay during pregnancy, but afterward, everything's fine. But that's not the case. So with Jane, I don't know how this is even possible, but not being able to eat much or throwing up constantly, I gained a huge amount of weight. And I think it's because I couldn't be active. And I was borderline diabetic during pregnancy. So, and the weight didn't come off by itself at all. It took well over a year. But the biggest thing was that right after she was born, I got a blood clot. So, yeah, which I didn't even know. I don't know how in all my doula studies or whatever, I hadn't heard much about blood clots. So the night after she was born, I was laying in bed nursing her and I had just like this extreme pain in my leg. And I did not have a very good midwife for that birth. Like that was my one kind of like negative birth experience. And so I had called my midwife and she was like, oh, well, it's probably fine. Maybe just an external vein. And I was just limping around for a week. And my mother-in-law, yes. My mother-in-law saw me and she's like, you could have a blood clot. And then it was like to the emergency room, immediately on injections for blood clotting, and on top of that, she had been on my tailbone. So my tailbone was really kicked out and twisted. So that took a year of chiropractor, so it's just like, I was just a hot mess. It was such a long journey back that the idea of bouncing back would be the furthest thing from my mind. One thing I I felt after that year that I had learned in that year was that you can be way out of health and you can be way overweight and all that. And if you do tiny steps, you can get well again. So I learned really just not to judge other people was one of the things. And I also learned that going on a walk for 5 minutes is 100% more than not going on a walk at all. Like, I had always been like, I'm going to go on a 5-mile run, that kind of thing. And so learning, like, I'm going to take a 5-minute walk was enough, for that day or that time. And then I could get where I was going, but the steps were going to have to be so careful and so tiny. And I was going to have to not care what people thought of me for a while.
That would be a tough lesson to learn, a tough pill to swallow after having done it multiple times before and have it be so different. Do you have other kind of lifelines that you can think of during that time that really helped you?
So when I think of that period, like having Jane and having Remy, there weren't any lifelines other than my faith, which by then was really strong because that's what keeps you alive. So that was the only lifeline. When I had the blood clot, it was really scary because I'm looking at this brand new baby, that I'm the one feeding, I'm the one taking care of, and feeling like I could die, And I remember the first night home from the hospital, I'm like, okay, we've started the injections, but this is, they're still like, if you feel this and if you feel this, come back immediately. So I actually had the book of Psalms, and I had someone, before they even knew about the blood clot, about 2 days before, had given me this icon of Mary, and it was Our Lady of Protection, who I'd never heard of. And so she's holding a mantle, and I would sleep with that and have the Psalms near me. And I felt so protected and so safe. So that, at that time, that was my lifeline, I would say.
Wow. Well, and how old are Jude and Esme at this time?
So Jude would have been, Esme was 14. Jude was 16 when Jane was born.
So you got a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old. You always have difficult pregnancies. You have Jane. How many years between Jane and Remy?
They're almost exactly 2 years apart. So He came a week before they would have been 2 years apart. And with him, honestly, so the other really interesting part of this is women in my family tend to be done with their fertility by age 38.
Oh my goodness.
So I was in perimenopause when I got pregnant with Jane.
Hello?
With Jane?
Yes. So when I got pregnant with Remy, we were like on a timeline, right?
Wow.
So it was very intentional. I mean, I was like, I don't want Jane to be alone. We've got, maybe one more.
I was going to ask, what drove you to have a second pregnancy in perimenopause after the blood clot situation?
Yes. So I'm thinking that would have been maybe I got pregnant with Remy in January, and then my oldest moved back in March, and that's when all the COVID stuff was happening. Then at the last part of that pregnancy, I went on blood thinners. So I had really wanted to have a home birth because that was the time when, like, sometimes babies were being separated from parents because of COVID, and you don't separate me from my baby, like
no.
So I was going to have a home birth, and then at the end of my pregnancy, I realized that I was probably tending toward blood clots. And so I made the decision to go on blood thinners, which means you have a hospital birth.
Oh, wow.
So I'm thinking, like, how do we plan this so that we're never separated from him? Or we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. And so I went into labor a week and a half early. And it was a really gentle labor. Like, I would it was like 4:00 in the afternoon, and I'd squat every time I had a contraction. And then, like, maybe around midnight, I laid down and took a nap. And then I woke up, and I was like, I'm going to go on the birthing ball. And immediately, it was like, okay, I was sleeping because I was in transition, and this baby is coming.
Oh, my goodness.
So we did the like movie drive where you're like those ladies breathing,
Were
at
you
2
kneeling on
a.m.
the seat? Like, could you even buckle, or were you like doing the
No,
backwards?
I was just kind of like to the side. And so we don't even know where we're going because we've never been to the birthing center at Aspirus.
Oh, this
Oh
is in
my
Mosta
gosh.
then.
So
Okay.
we're like driving around the hospital, and finally my husband's like, there it is. So he lets me out, and I go to the elevator. I realize if I get on the elevator, I'm going to have the baby there. So I'm just going to stand here and wait. So finally he comes running in. We go up in the elevator. They hand me a mask, and I throw it, and then they were like, lay down. And I said, no. And so they just pulled down my pants, and he was born.
Right, like getting off of the elevator.
Well, right when we walked into the room. So we walked into the birth center, into the room, and he was just born like that. I was kneeling on the bed. They were like, we're going to check you. And I said, no way. They were like, take off your clothes. I was like, no way. So he is born. I catch him. The doctor comes in, and I'm holding him. And I realize he's stone cold and blue. So he gets taken away from me anyway because he needed oxygen. So they just take him, immediately. And my husband went up to the NICU with him because our thing was like, our baby's never alone. We had already decided that because of COVID. So he went up to the NICU, and I'm left alone in a room with no baby.
What did I don't even know. What did you do?
You weep. There's nothing else you can do. And the nurse says, we need to make sure. So, they start checking me out and getting me, they say, well, you can't go up until certain, things that they've checked, or they make sure you're not hemorrhaging. So it was about 3 hours. And finally I went up there and I walked into the room. And, by this point, like, he's in the incubator, he's got the arterial line, nobody can hold him, nobody can touch him. And my husband looks at me and he goes, he has Down syndrome.
You didn't know.
We didn't know.
Oh,
I had asked them when I had my ultrasound. I didn't do other testing, so that's on me. But when I had my ultrasound, I was
nothing's on you, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I was like, his nose is so little and his head is so little, is anything wrong? And they're like, no, it's all totally normal. But honestly, my appointments when COVID was going on, like, they were so, like, not what they should have been at all. It was like, this is not about the woman who's pregnant. This is like, they would sit there and like talk about new COVID protocols and stuff like that. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, you look good.
I can't even, I think I would have blacked out the 3 hours without my baby. Let alone.
There is nothing. And then you go up there, and then of course the main thing after that becomes pumping.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So right away, as soon as you realize that you're not going to be able to hold your baby for a week is what it was.
What do you mean? Because of COVID or what?
No. Because when they have an arterial line, if you bump it, they could die. So you get to look at your baby for a week. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So that was my second matrescence. I would say it was with Remy because I learned that when our children can eat and breathe and do all these amazing things that they do, that I thought, somehow we're just, because I was such a great mom, I didn't think that, but it was like, we have these beautiful births and I breastfeed, and I learned that everything is a gift. Every single thing. Like, nothing is just a given. And one of the nurses, she told me that first night he was on like full oxygen, CPAP, and she had been called in just to sit there and watch his monitor because they were so concerned. So what had happened is he had a collapsed lung. And then, of course, what we didn't realize at the time was he also had a pretty significant hole in his heart. So, you're finding these things out in the weeks that follow. And then what really saved his life was nitrous oxide. they were able to give him that. I think some people were saved from COVID with that. But what happens is they give them that and it kind of expands their lungs. And then once they're expanded, they really slowly wean them off of it. So it's like an extremely slow weaning process. And if they're breathing afterwards, then it worked.
Oh my goodness.
You had a 2-year-old and you're spending all your time in the NICU for how long?
So 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Okay. And because it was COVID, none of my children could meet their brother for 6 weeks.
Oh my gosh. And they were old enough to really
They were old enough.
Really.
And Esme's fear was that he would die and she would have never met him. So it was because we had kind of, with COVID, we're worst case scenario, one of us gets COVID and, the baby gets taken away, but then the other one can be with. And the real person who suffered the most was my almost 2-year-old, because I had weaned her in June and this was September. Esme was just pulling up this video of Jane's second birthday, which I wasn't there. And there's a cake and there's grandma and grandpa and siblings. And she blows out her candles and then she just starts bawling. And I would think, okay, I'm going to go home and see Jane. So my husband would come and we'd switch. But she would hang on to me so tight when I had to go back. Even if she was asleep, she would have her arms around my neck, and so, but I was on a time limit because I had to pump. And then once we could hold him and start trying to either breastfeed or bottle feed, that's just what you're doing around the clock. So, and then it's a waiting game. Once they start eating and breathing, then you can get them home.
And then he was on a G-tube for how long?
Yeah. So in order to get home, we ended up getting him a G-tube because he couldn't eat for all practical purposes. So, the first time I breastfed him, his latch was perfect. I was so excited. And the nurses come in and they're like, well, he was tachypnic while you were nursing, which just means they're breathing, but a respiratory rate goes way up. So she's like, so you can't do that again.
I had no idea we were going here. I'm
sorry.
I'm just processing. Thank you.
I wrote down.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm really, thank you. I'm sure it'll be so helpful for so many women to hear. And I'm just sitting in so much gratitude.
But here's what I have to say, knowing you, Elise, I want to know how that's what Emily always says. I want to know. I never say that, but right now I really want to know. When I would see you from afar and I didn't know you at all, my first thought was, look at that beautiful, stylish, peaceful mom. Those were my things, those were the adjectives in my head. You obviously care about how you look and you love dressing yourself. You're just so peaceful. And there's this quiet joy that reminds me a little bit of my mom. And that was before I even knew you. So how did you get to that place?
I would say, and this is actually what I would say was the outcome of my second matrescence, was joy. Because I don't think I had joy until I had Remy. Whoa. And the reason I had happiness and I had moments of joy, but I didn't know, it's hard to describe, I just think about waking up with my husband next to me and Remy between us, the way that feels. I don't, I had never felt so much gratitude and joy. I did hear one thing recently. It was that someone was talking about happiness and finding happiness. And it said, if you want happiness, either you can get all the things on your list that are going to make you happy or do those things, or you can make your list really short. And it made sense because I thought, well, all I wanted at that time was for Remy to live. And he did. So why shouldn't I be joyful? What if he didn't? I think I'd still be joyful from knowing him. So it's like this really, I don't know. It's the hardest point was at 6 months he had to finally have his open heart surgery. Oh. that for me, because I was more not taken up with birth and, all of that, that was a little bit of a distraction, like just trying to recover from having a baby.
Are we all crying now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, please,
Elise, are you the only one not crying?
No, I'm crying. I can't talk. I didn't even write any of this stuff down to talk about. So before heart surgery, it happens really suddenly, because what they do is they're watching him, and then it's like, okay, he's getting lethargic. He's not able to eat, whatever. It's time, So you find out like 2 weeks beforehand.
Oh my gosh.
So they're like, okay, it's time. It's time for heart surgery. So that means scheduling, going down to Children's in Milwaukee during COVID, getting our COVID tests, getting him a COVID test, grandparents coming to stay with the kids. And then you go and, so it's just me and Isaiah and Remy, and we stay at the Ronald McDonald, and, you bathe him the night before and sleep together and take pictures that morning, and then you go and you hand him to someone and you see him 6 hours, you sit there for 6 hours. But what was amazing, so we go there the morning of, and the nurse who walks in is wearing a bracelet that says, "Pick up your cross." And then the anesthesiologist walks in, and he's like, "So I hear he's got a touch of the Down syndrome." And he's just talking. It turns out that he's Charlie Barron's dad.
That's funny. What? Okay, can I tell you something? I mean, this is so creepy. I'm pretty sure he lives 2 blocks away from where I'm recording this right now.
Charlie Barron's himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm saying that because my husband sees him walk on our street pretty frequently, and he recognized like the house from videos, which I'm like taking his word for it. I don't know.
Right.
I just feel like a creep
Kevin's
every
seen
time
it.
he says it. Oh,
Kevin's
so our brother. Okay. All right. Yes.
I'm sure you're right. I mean, he has to live somewhere, right?
I just have to say, like, what a blessing it sounds like, because, I mean, you lived in, outside of Seattle, you've lived in some very cool places, you moved back to the Midwest, which I'm sure has a lot of perks, I'm sure, but also a lot of things that are kind of a bummer. But that is such a beautiful Midwest moment.
Yeah.
I know. Like your hour of just, there's not even a word for it.
6 hours.
And then it gets even better. So the nurse that I end up having to hand him off to is like 6'4", this huge, muscular, beautiful man. He could have been Jesus. So I hand my baby over to this man, and he just like wraps him in this warm towel, and he's walking down the hall. He actually fought the woman nurse to carry him.
Oh.
So the last I'm seeing of my son, he's just like in this guy's arms, and I just felt like, okay, God's got this.
Wow.
6-month postpartum hormones, like on top of just the hardest journey for most people's lives ever, like aside from postpartum anything.
Mm-hmm. Plus, which I finally put the pieces together later, I was in, very, very advanced perimenopause. So I'm having hot flashes.
You can do
anxiety attacks. Yep. So I'm having hot flashes, anxiety attacks. My periods are like 1 week apart and then 2 months apart.
You can do this like right after you have a baby and you're breastfeeding
too.
And I'm pumping.
What? That ain't right.
Have they studied you?
I don't know. I'm not making these things up. So I don't even know, like maybe you guys shouldn't even post this show, but one of my most challenging moments when Remy was 9 months.
Please. I mean, I have to say, Elise, we will post whatever you are comfortable with.
Okay.
I can tell you anything you're comfortable with is just a gift to the whole world. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Again, like I know I'm at the end of and I'm thinking, so right around 9 months, I, was running. So I had pumped for 9 months. That's all he had gotten was my breast milk. And because of the stress around the time of heart surgery, my supply was just like really dwindling. So when he would have been about a year, because it was September, I got pregnant again. And I wanted to. That's the crazy part. I really wanted to, because I wanted to have a normal birth. I wanted to breastfeed my baby. I wanted to have milk for Remy. I mean, this is how crazy I was. And I didn't get sick that time. And so when I went in 8 weeks, for an ultrasound, I wasn't surprised that there wasn't a heartbeat. But then you have to wait for the miscarriage. And so Remy had been scheduled for a surgery at 9 months, where they were going to go in and figure out why he wasn't eating. So they were actually going to do a triple scope. So they were going to check out his esophagus and his lungs. Forget what like sinuses, ENT kind of stuff. So we actually brought him down to Madison that time, stayed at the Ronald McDonald House, and that night before his surgery, I started having a miscarriage. So I wake up that morning and I'm in the shower and I'm just shaking, because I know like Remy is going to have surgery again, and I'm losing this baby. And this is the beautiful thing. Okay. And this I remembered. So the day before, I had to take him in for a swallow study, and they always ask, "Are you pregnant?" And there was this lovely speech therapist that I had met with once before, and she's in there and she's pregnant, very pregnant. And she says, "We just always have to ask this, are you pregnant?" And I said, "Well, I am, but it's, I'm losing the baby." And so she's like, "Well, you should probably, we should go in the other room because we're pregnant." And so the next day I had seen her after his surgery. And of course, now at this point, like, I'm really actively losing the baby now. And she wrote me the most beautiful letter that I could, here's this doctor who doesn't know me, but of course, obviously is like on the verge of accepting a child into the world. And she wrote me a note, and she just said, "I want you to know that my thoughts are with you, and I can't imagine, what this is like." And that note I want to be the person writing people notes like that, someday when they're in a hard time, people that I don't know. And I'll remember that to this day. I'll remember that forever, and I'll remember her, and I'll pray for her. And
wow. So your life looks a little different than you thought it would look.
Yes. Yeah, and yes. Where is Remy today? Like, what did Remy do today? Cute. It's a Friday.
Okay. I can't even
Remy's
tell
Friday?
So Remy today went to the movie theater for the first time and was terrified.
Oh no.
So actually my 6-year-old went with her school to the theater, but she's never been to a movie theater. And she goes, "Why is it so dark? Why is it so loud?" But by
Great
the time,
questions.
Right. So by the time Remy was upset enough to go, it was like 10 minutes and she was totally settled in. So Remy and I walked, and there's a children's museum of sorts right next to the movie theater. So we just went in there, and it was awesome.
So you had a great day.
So yeah. Remy's doing
Yes,
well?
Remy learned to walk right after his 4th birthday. So he's walking. He is now talking. He knows like 200 signs in sign language.
Which I'm assuming you must also know if you can communicate him. There's
most of them, not all.
Okay.
Not all.
Great.
So that was new. I always learned with the other ones, you should learn sign language. And I was like, or not.
Wow.
So, yeah. And he had his G tube taken out in June. He ended up, so the second surgery he had was at a year. And at 9 months, he was diagnosed with something called food protein-induced enterocolitis syndrome, or FPIES, if you've heard of that. there will probably be some mom listening to this whose kid has had FPIES. And what that is there are certain foods, and most of them are all the first foods that you introduce to a baby. So sweet potatoes, rice, oats, banana. And what happens, so when we started speech therapy, because after the heart surgery, he had an oral version. So like if you put, a bottle or breast or spoon near him, he would just violently turn away. So we started speech therapy, and of course, the things that were speech therapy then is feeding therapy. So it's under the same umbrella. I think the first time I gave him sweet potatoes, I thought he had gotten a flu, but it was kind of weird. So he got really, his hands and feet got really cold, and he was vomiting and having diarrhea. And then he basically just went comatose for 12 hours. So we were scheduled to go to a woman's house who had invited me over because she had adopted 2 little boys with Down syndrome. And so we just kept saying, we should get together, we should get together. Well, the day of, I think the 3rd time this had happened to him, I called her and I just said, we can't come. My son is throwing up and having diarrhea and screaming, and then he passes out. And she goes, oh, he has FPIES.
Wow.
Which is, so the food protein in those foods actually causes, intestinal distress to the level, they have to empty their body before they're okay, and their hands and feet get really cold, and they'll lay there, but then it's 12 hours later, they'll wake up smiling and completely normal. So because he had a G-tube, we weren't having to go to the emergency room because I could hydrate him during that time. If a kid didn't have a G-tube, it would usually be a trip to the emergency room.
Wow.
So that was kind of why it took him so long to eat. Because once I ran out of breast milk, there was one formula that they had recommended for him because it can't have anything that's going to cause that. So we had put him on that, and then that formula was recalled. So we learned that on a Friday. We looked at our cans of formula. They were all in the batch that had to be tossed. So we had a weekend where we didn't have any food for him. Because the only formulas, so I called Madison. I said, we don't have any formula. None of the stores have formula on the shelf of these kinds. And then they had recommended 2 others, and those were all bought out. And we called the emergency room here, and they said, we can't give any formula away. There's a formula shortage. I don't have milk anymore. He's over a year old. And this is where Facebook comes in. I finally had Facebook, and so I posted that night, I don't have any food for my child. If anyone has any ideas, this is the situation. And women started bringing breast milk to my door. And then our entire life was just finding and rounding up breast milk for I think it was about 9 months. And then
9 months?
Yeah.
You were just rounding up breast milk.
Yes.
So here, you thought you were going to get your PhD.
Yeah.
And your full-time job is
yes. Well, I'm still going to write a book.
I know you are. And it's going to be amazing.
So we're rounding up breast milk, and people, we're finding, we have 2 freezer chests in the basement now because of our whole breast milk adventure. But that was amazing in itself. And then the process of finding out what foods he could eat. So there was a time when so I started with blueberries, and then we did quinoa. And so over time, I developed an entire recipe that I could give him that had all the nutrients that he needed. So it had molasses for calcium. It had, it usually had blueberries. A lot of vegetables are usually a trigger. So berries tend to be pretty safe. But every food, that I would add to his blend was this scary thing, to think could this trigger something? And sometimes things would, which killed me. That was awful.
Because you knew that you put it in his food.
Right.
But also you need to put it in his food so know.
I'm force feeding my child.
Yeah.
So we're doing all this, you know, I have this blend that I can give him. I'm faithfully blending every day. And I mean, that was my life, you know, is blending food and feeding him. And then Christmas Eve, so this would have been maybe 2 Christmas Eves ago, I get a call from a friend just out of the blue. And we're talking, and she's talking about that she finally went back to her OT practice. She had taken, you know, a lot of time to raise kids, and she had 2 daughters. Her specialty was in feeding.
Wow.
And she knows nothing about Remy. So I started telling her about Remy, and we were getting to the point where we were looking. I had just done a phone interview with a program that will help you with tube weaning, you know, $20,000 out of pocket kind of thing. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, because that's how desperate you are. Your child doesn't eat. They don't eat, and there's no medical establishment that can show you how to get them to eat. And so she says, I will take you on as a client. And we start meeting every week for, you know, Zoom appointments, and she starts sending me books. And she actually goes and gets a month of training with the program is called Thrive. So with these specialists, you know, just top of the line, she sends me, there's a podcast called Tube to Table that they do. And so last Lent, I love, you know, like I listen to podcasts while I'm on the treadmill, and I would just listen to these story after story. How did these parents wean their child from the tube? And slowly we did it. And that, I mean, that's too long of a story to tell, but it does, one of the things I wrote down, and I think you were talking about this in a different show, just like kind of when you're in the work world, there's a lot of, like, everything is very measurable, you know. So let's say when I worked on the computer, it was like, I got a lot of positive feedback, I got a paycheck, and it wasn't, and this is why, again, that it was a second matrescence, because it took me that long to learn that my greatest triumphs, the things that make me who I am and make me whole in a way, you know, because say something like tube feeding, that took me hours of research, hours of time, you know, just thousands of hours, you know, and nobody knew about it. And nobody will ever know about it. You know, so it's like my greatest triumph, which is that my child is not still on a G-tube, nobody knows about.
And also nobody can really understand. Because
right.
I'm listening to you say these things, and some things are clicking for me, like, oh my God, that's got to be so difficult. And I'm sure you're giving us 5%, maybe 2% of the whole story. And we're still just like, what even is this? Like, what is this?
I know.
Like, I'm still processing what it would feel like to have my child be nourished in that way. I haven't even made it to the step where we're talking about adding things in, watching him get sick, taking them out, and to hear that there's no support and there's no research for this. I mean, oh my gosh.
Well, and there are certain things like you were saying. So all this and all the struggle and all the successes, I still can't think about the fact that I couldn't breastfeed him. That's too painful. When I'm on a bad day, when I start to go down that road, I can't do that, because that was a gift that I could give my other children, you know. But then there are other things. So with the other children, anytime we snuggled, you know, and all kids are different, but especially like Esme nursed till she was over 3. And for her, it was all about nursing. So Remy was the first baby that I had that just was 100% comforted with a snuggle.
Oh.
You know, and I mean, we took so many naps together, just, you know, crawl on the bed, and so that was something not that I would have asked for or would have preferred, but it was still a gift to have that experience of like, I'm holding this child and all they want is just to be held.
As you.
So, you know, there are these like little gifts along the way that are completely unexpected. You know, you look at your other kids and you think, wow, I worried about this or I worried about that. And all they were just like these fat, healthy kids running around, eating and doing all their stuff.
I think you've definitely gone through 2 matrescences. At least just hearing your stories. But this is a little extra, even beyond matrescence. I mean, it's like walking into a kiln and coming out completely reforged.
Yeah.
So, I felt shattered. Shattered was the word Callie and I used a lot.
Yes, I love that word. I love that word. That shattered new mom look, I think you guys said.
Yes.
That was Auntie Katie.
Katie O'Leary.
Shout out to Katie Ross. Katie
O'Leary Ross. Perfect.
Yep. And she said it, and we were both just like, yes.
That's it.
But shattered is different than completely incinerated.
I would always think about the refined like gold.
Yes.
I always feel like when I look at a life story, there's always something, and I always feel like it's maybe late 30s, early 40s. There's a defining moment, and it's different for everybody. But I always feel like there's a defining moment that sends someone in either a new direction or kind of solidifies the direction that they're in. And one thing, we had been told is, well, this is really hard on marriage. A lot of the nurses were like, a lot of marriages don't make it through the whole NICU, special needs. And for us, it solidified. I mean, it was hard, but it bound us like nothing. And it changed our family. It changed my older kids. It's just, it was our moment of redefining. And I did feel like we can either become better or we can fall apart. Those are the only 2 choices. It's like,
yeah.
And we don't have the strength ourselves necessarily to become better, but we have a lot of gifts that we were given. We did have supportive families at that time. Like you were saying, when did things shift? Well, my husband went from being like the least favorite son-in-law to the favorite son, just because he's so faithful. He's so loving. I think my mom always, he's kind of ADD and he might be a little aspy. And so she would think he doesn't do maybe all the things that she was looking at that a husband should do for his wife, or, it might look like he's ignoring me. Like, let's say he's playing the piano and I say something, he won't stop. And then my mom's like, he's ignoring me. I'm like, he knows exactly what I said. He's going to answer me in 5 minutes, So just there's certain things where it's like, it is a defining moment, and everything, because I was at a point too with the older kids where I was actually thinking of going back to school, and I was thinking of, finally writing all the books that I had drafts for, whatever, and this was my time. And somehow, it was very intentional, we decided to have more children. And then all the things that you can't decide that come along with that actually have, in some ways, broken me and shattered me. And I feel maybe more fragile than I used to feel. I feel more vulnerable. I feel like I have less to offer the world in terms of skills.
You feel like you have less to offer the world after you just made it through?
Well, I feel that, before, music was always such a huge contribution, or writing. I always was knitting and making things, and I don't do any of that. I've just started reading my first book for pleasure in 5 years. All the books I've read, I was an avid reader, and then all the books that I've been reading now were on tube feeding and blending your own food and how, all these things. So it's like, in some ways, I do feel like I've lost myself, but I also have something really new, but I'm still uncovering it, if that makes sense.
So it's those physical acts that you can't do that you used to do, but your wisdom is invaluable, which you're probably just uncovering because you probably haven't had time to process. But you're just gonna be a mentor to countless women. I just know it already.
I don't know.
Callie, is Elise your sourdough friend? Like you came into her house. And
my husband
Yes.
had a sourdough.
Okay, so
Yes.
Elise, I remember
Yes.
when I heard about you, Callie, I think had called me in her car or something. She was leaving your house and she was like, Emily, I just met the most amazing woman and family. And she's like, I don't know how to describe it. You walk into their house and you just feel like you're in this incredible place. Like I walked in and she was like, do you want some coffee? And there was just sourdough that was just like coming right out of, like Callie was trying to like describe to me these like intangible feelings
Okay,
that she had.
here's something interesting. After you left that morning, I thought, wow, I must just come across as like the stupidest old lady. But then, okay, so here's the other piece. But then, okay, so here's the other piece. And this is something, so up until we had Jane, we always had like tons of people in the house. Just so homeschool things, we would do like homeschool choir and homeschool Roman banquet. And, so then there was that. And then when we got involved in music at church, it was like all the college kids came over after choir practice. And one thing, and this is one thing I'm trying to figure out how to gain my confidence back, is when you have, so Remy's tube fed and I blend his food, not now, but up until recently. And then Jane, because of me being taken away so abruptly, stopped eating. So she had been like my best toddler eater, trying new foods. And I was like, this is going to be, great. I'm actually doing it right this time. And when I disappeared for 6 weeks, she went to eating one food, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And then when we were teaching Remy how to eat, mealtime had to be a very specific thing. So there's a few rules. You never compliment a child for eating. You never reward them for eating. You never tell them to eat. You never even look at them when they're eating because they can sense your anxiety and your excitement, So you just have the food there and you pretend like nothing's happening. And you can't really have people in the house and people over for dinner when you're trying to do it. Like even with my family, I had to send them, countless printouts. Please don't ask about Remy's eating in front of him. Please don't talk about food in front of him and food goals, and all that. So it's a very specific thing that you're doing. And I remember, I have a video of it. I had offered Remy something to drink probably 3,000 times. And one day he drank a cup of chocolate milk. That was less than a year ago. And I have it, and it's the first time I had really heard him swallow since being born, which is like the most beautiful sound. And so he's just sitting there with his straw and his chocolate milk going, it's just it's the most beautiful thing, but I have to act like nothing's happening, so if you have family around, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, she's drinking, and as the mom, you just have to act like this happens every day.
Yeah. And how do you explain the struggle? Like you can talk about the struggle. Right. It's not the same thing. Like it's not going to resonate with most people as the way it does when you live it. Like the magnitude, I don't think you can grasp how necessary this work is.
Right. Like this is so important. But the point is like, I haven't had people in my house. And one thing I'm really struggling with is gaining the confidence to have people in the house to see. Mealtime is still really weird, so because Remy doesn't like to swallow solid food. So this is still a work in progress. Like he fills his plate and he'll chew things and taste things, but he always spits them out. So not everybody's comfortable with that. So for me, it's just, I need to figure out, like, I want to start living a normal life again, but I don't know how. And I'm newly confident about some new things, but I'm also really unconfident because of 5 years of like living in a cave.
Well, my visit was magical. I hope that gives you a little bit of
my confidence then.
And Emily can vouch for it.
No, really, I was like, this is the friend, right? I'm pretty sure Elise is that friend,
right?
Where she like had to call me because she was just so excited to have like met you and B.
Well,
just
that
been in
means
your
a lot because I
space.
tend to feel like people must come into this space and be like, I just went to crazy, because it's like, I can't explain to people what's going on with Remy too, especially when he's there. It's a messy process.
Well, I know that Callie has to edit this at some point.
I don't
but
even.
I need
I'm
to
just
know.
like, I can't even think about that. I'm still.
This is just. I honestly,
I'm shattered again.
Yeah, I'm a different person after this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing, Elise.
Well, you're both so beautiful and you've inspired me. Callie, especially because I know her more, I look at her and I think I want to be like that when I grow up.
Me too.
Oh my,
me too.
Crying again.
Okay, to avoid her crying, there's something that I've been wondering this whole conversation. I've been wondering this whole time how you and your husband dealt with the changes. I think in the beginning you were talking about your kids. Viewing your marriage as this sort of, maybe not unattainable, but a very high bar is the sense that I got from, which is beautiful. And so then I hear about you getting married at 19, having a kid.
Right. Did you know she had dreadlocks?
Oh my God. How fun is
Definitely
that?
had dreadlocks a few times.
Okay, Bellingham makes so much more sense now too. Not that it didn't before.
I had the nose ring. I want to get the nose ring back so bad, but here it says so much. It's like there you can have. I probably will.
You have the right nose for it. You can do
I don't know.
Yeah, no, do it. How did you two stay connected? How did you cultivate this marriage? This was my question before I heard about Remy. So we could talk about your time as a young couple or now, both, whatever you're comfortable sharing. I want to know how you cultivated and grew this relationship that your kids revere.
It's interesting because I've been thinking about that, just with all the possible questions. And I've been thinking about, especially while we were in Bellingham, that was one thing I discovered about myself. I'm not comfortable with other people watching my children unless it's family. And we didn't have family. So we didn't do date nights. We did stay at home date nights. We have a lot of really similar interests. Like if I'd get into the doula and midwifery thing, like he just wanted to hear about all of it, or, if we're reading, we read, not now, but we used to read books together. And from the very beginning, so I would say when we got married, we would be considered kind of anti-materialist. So from the very beginning, we were like, things don't matter. Probably things matter to us more now than they did then. We own a home. But I think that was actually a really big piece of it because neither of us were really striving for some big thing we wanted or some big achievement. So many things are interesting to us and beautiful and exciting, and everything our kids got into was always really beautiful and interesting and exciting. And we did stuff together with them, and then we'd stay up late and read books or watch movies or whatever. And then so I kind of had not a reversion, but we became Catholic about 10 years ago. And since that point...
both of you together?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So he was practicing his Orthodox faith and I wasn't practicing anything. And then about 10 years ago, I had a just a personal conversion. And then together we came to the Catholic Church as like looking for a place where we could land. And since that time, we've always prayed together. He always brings me coffee in bed in the morning. That's one thing that's worked out really well for him. But, so now like he brings me my coffee and we just sit there and say prayers. And that goes a long way, I will say. And then just having I do think being interested in the things that your spouse is interested in is just really fun, and it makes you feel important if somebody else is interested in what you think is interesting.
Kind of going through my brain, like the Rolodex I have of the strong marriages, the strong partnerships where I'm just that does seem to be a through line in my 20-second examination. These people do just show a lot of interest in each other's interests, share hobbies. That's cool.
We love to walk together. Like that's been it. Sometimes it'll be like 10 at night and we'll go out for a 3-mile walk, you know, because we have Esme here. So we're like, kids are down and we can go walk and then we'll just talk.
You just have so much spirit and joy. And I just hope that we can all get a fraction of that.
Well, everyone you've had on this show so far are all amazing. I've been inspired. I've been walking around just like with little tidbits. Like what I think, Callie, you said, your heart breaks. Your heart breaks with motherhood every time, every day, every minute. But the heart's a muscle and it gets stronger. Your brain makes new pathways so that things that happened before, you know, you have a place to put it. It's like, okay, I can do this.
Women.
Yeah.
We're amazing.
It's true. It's true. Oh my gosh.
Well, I also just love how you have found support just from other women. Like your whole journey has just been, I feel like women, whether it's the homeschool moms at the library or the nurse, you know, just like.
Or the 9 months of breast milk supply.
Yeah, just
so incredible.
I guess mothers specifically.
So there was one young woman, I have to tell this story because it was so beautiful. So when she heard about my situation, she goes, I have a chest freezer full of breast milk you can have. So what had happened is when she had her first son, she had milk supply issues. And so the minute she had her second son, she started pumping because she was so worried that she wasn't going to have milk for him. But then she ended up having an abundance of milk. So she gives me all her, you know, little bags of breast milk. And what's so cute is, you know, you write the time and the date. And so I would look at the time and be like 2 a.m. And then she'd write little notes. She had written notes to herself. You're beautiful. Smile on, you know, so I'm getting all these like sweet notes, you know.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And they weren't even written to me. She had written them to herself, you know, and that is a really good thing. Like when we love ourselves and when we support ourselves, it's not a bad thing to do. Like it spreads. The more we nurture ourselves and our own children, it does spread. I
love that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what makes you feel beautiful?
Well, my husband makes me feel beautiful. He makes me feel so beautiful even when I don't feel beautiful.
Just when you really need it.
Yeah. Yeah. The way he looks at me, you know, with now, I was going to say one of the big things is with Jane and Remy, I got really bad varicose veins. And so, like, summer is stressful to me, but to have someone who, when they look at me, just have to kiss me, you know, that's just awesome. Mm-hmm. So, and that or a good pair of jeans that fit perfectly.
I love it. I love it.
Well, it was just a delight meeting you, first of all. And I'm just deeply grateful for everything you shared. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. You're both amazing and you're doing such an amazing thing for women. So keep doing it.
Thanks,
You've been listening to The Real Mom Hub. Our music is by Naomi O'Leary. You can find us on social at The Real Mom Hub. We're not the authority or even very educated on the medical issues discussed. Do your own research, talk to an expert, make your own decisions, and call us if you learn anything new.
If you like what you hear, follow us on Instagram, or better yet, subscribe to our newsletter. If you don't, that's fine. We can all move on. Our purpose here is community, so if we've resonated with you, tell a friend.
Thanks for listening.